Hello, I'm Zaccura and welcome back to my channel. For today's video, I'm doing a product review on the Parkoo brand dual tip brush pens. They are water-based and come in 60 different colors, and each pen is dual tipped, with one side being a brush nib and the other being a fine pen tip, sort of like a fine liner. Now you may notice that on the rest of the pens there's this piece of tape on each of the caps. I put those pieces of tape there because one thing I noticed right away about these pens is that other than the colors of the caps themselves, they have no other form of color coding on them. And this is something that I usually don't really care much about. If you guys know me, then you know I'm much more of a grab and go kind of type. I hardly ever plan color palettes and whatnot. But after testing some of the markers, I noticed that some of the colors aren't totally accurate to the cap color, and combine that with the fact that there are 60 of these pens, I knew that I would end up forgetting which is which, and once I found the color I really liked, I was kind of worried about putting it back in the box because I knew I was going to forget which one it was. So I decided, heck, why not do some of my own labeling? As I already mentioned, these pens are water-based, which means that you can blend them out using a wet brush, and I was pretty curious to see how they would react to the water. Plus, the day I decided to do this was on one of those super chill, downpouring, rainy days. So with all those factors combined, I felt pretty motivated to do some color swatching, which is something I honestly never do, but I figured this was a good excuse to give it a go. So let's go get set up, throw on some music, and swatch some colors. So the first thing I did was take all the pens out of the box and put them into this ginormous coffee mug that I have no idea why I have, considering I don't drink coffee. So this way I could put each one back into the box one at a time, and then got to swatching, starting with the reds. I started by putting a little bit of color followed by blending them out with my water brush. Then I would label the color both on the paper and on the marker and then put it back into the box. I didn't really think too much about going from lightest to darkest or anything like that because that didn't really matter to me. I just needed an easy system so that whenever I pick up a marker, I could look up its number and then look up the corresponding color swatch to see how it looks on paper. So the color coding that I used was R for reds and pinks, P for purples, B for blues, G for greens, O for oranges, Y for yellows, E for earth tones, S for silvers and grays, and just a line for black. And as you can see, there is quite a variety of colors within these pens, especially when you consider the fact that each one of them can be blended out to be a lighter color. However, some colors do take better to being blended than others. I noticed some colors didn't really want to get dissolved into the water, some of them wanted to get dissolved a lot, so they're a little different for each one, which is why doing this swatch really actually helped me not only understand the colors, but just also how they act when they're blended out with water. So with my lovely swatch sheet done and all the pens were now labeled, it was time to really put these pens to the test and do an illustration with them. The next day when I did the illustration, the weather was pretty much the opposite of the day before. It was sunny and I could not find a single cloud in the sky, and I kind of became inspired by the weather when it came to my illustration. There goes a sight from my soul. There goes a sight, there goes a sight. Now there goes a sight from my soul. So I wanted to include both rain and beautiful, clear weather in this illustration, and after thumbnailing a few ideas, I ultimately went with this boy who is holding an umbrella, but it's only raining inside the umbrella. Oh yeah, so deep. Some of you may notice that the character is drawn in a very similar style to my 4th of July illustration, and indeed, it is the same character. I've been really enjoying drawing in this cartoony style recently, where the characters have like really skinny and long limbs and big hands and feet. It's been really fun. Now usually when I'm done with the rough sketch, I'd go straight into the line work. However, when Parkoo sent me these brush pens to review, one thing I was really interested in was the fact that the second tip on them is a fine liner tip. Because usually when you see dual-ended markers, it's usually some kind of mix of a brush tip and a chisel tip, or a brush tip and a bullet tip, but not often you see ones that have a super fine tip like these do. And if they work well as fine liners, that means that I have 60 different colors of fine liners, which is pretty cool since I've only ever used black before. But because they are water-based, that means I can't use them before I color, especially not if I'm using the exact same pens, because otherwise it'll just bleed once I start blending with water. So that means I have to clean up my rough sketch because I'm going to go straight in with the colors first and then do the lining after. So this was the first time I ever used brush pens, so I really didn't know what to expect, especially when it came to blending them with water. And let me just start this off by saying they are not the same as watercolor. They act very, very differently to water than watercolors, at least from my experience. See, when you water down watercolor on paper, it's usually pretty uniform and controlled. You blend it out to however you feel looks good, and then you let it dry, and for the most part it stays that way, with the exception that the color usually lightens as it dries. But when it comes to the ink in these pens, however, as they dry, they continue to bleed. The ink very much likes to rush to the edges of wherever you put water, meaning if you were to put a drop of water on top of some color, once that water drop dries, you'll see a very noticeable lack of color in the middle of where that water drop was, and all the pigment will have rushed to the edge. This does happen with watercolors as well, but much, much less. And to be honest, at first this was pretty darn frustrating because I was treating them much the same as I would with watercolors. I would blend things out to where I thought they'd look nice and then watch it as it continues to bleed everywhere. And it's also kind of one of those like troll things too, because if you try to go back in and fix it, you just end up making things worse because you keep on adding more and more water, so it just continues to bleed more and more. And that's when I realized, hey, these aren't watercolors. Why am I treating them as watercolors? Once I realized how the ink in these pens work, I shifted my technique to be a lot looser, a lot sketchier, and a lot lighter on the water. Because if you don't pool the water, then the colors blend out without running to the edges as much. And once I shifted gears, I was kind of like, so that's how you use them. And it actually became a very enjoyable medium to use. Also, when it comes to how they are just straight out of the pen without using any water to blend at all, I actually really like them. The ink comes out really smooth and you can fill in areas without streaking. The brush nib is quite stiff, but I didn't find that to really matter for me. But I guess if you're doing calligraphy or something that needs that line weight variation, then that might not be the best. When you layer the colors on top of each other, they behave much the same as drawing inks in the sense that they don't really blend together, but rather they just sort of tint what's already there. When I explained this with the drawing inks in a previous video, I used the example that if you do digital art, it's sort of like when you set your layer mode to multiply. That's kind of what it looks like. So I can see these working very nicely for styles that don't require blending at all.
You've been spending flowers to me.
So, if you're looking for something that will give very controlled, smooth gradients, then I'd say go more for alcohol-based markers rather than water-based ones. But if you're someone who prefers working much looser and much quicker, or if you're looking for something to use in your sketchbook, then these are really great. I'm actually really looking forward to carrying these around with me to use in my sketchbook because I'm always looking for ways to add color to my sketchbook, but with every other medium that I used, there was always some issue. With colored pencil, it was that I had to sharpen them all the time, plus I was always very concerned that I would break the lead inside them if I carried them around in my bag. With watercolors, they're just simply too wet for the thin paper of a sketchbook. And with my Copic markers, you get the issue, which is that they bleed through the paper. Not to mention, they cost like $7 a piece, and as someone who is notorious for losing pens, I don't feel totally comfortable walking around with them. But with these brush pens, you don't have to worry about bleed through because they are water-based, which means that they stay on the surface of the paper rather than soaking in. And you can get like really vibrant colors without your paper warping too much. Which, speaking of vibrant colors, that's one thing that I like about these pens is that the colors are very, very pigmented and they don't lose their vibrancy even when you water them down. If there was one little gripe about them that I could say is that I wish there was a lighter peach color for skin tones because it was a bit difficult to get the boy's skin. I ended up having to use like a yellow and a pink, both of which are very strong, so I was a little shaky with them because I knew that it would be very easy to overdo it. And in the end I made it work, so hooray! So yeah, I definitely recommend these pens as a sketchbook companion, especially with those fine liner tips on them, because this way you can color and line without having to carry around multiple products. In this illustration, I used an orange and a yellow for the line work, which I think turned out pretty cool, and I'm looking forward to doing more illustrations without having to have that normal black line work. So as you can see, the places where I saturated the ink with a lot of water did bleed some under the tape, which is another similarity to drawing inks. I noticed that when I work with drawing inks, I often don't get a perfectly clean line when I remove the tape. But I just went in with my white Uni Posca pen and cleaned up the edges a bit, and after that, the illustration was finished. So thank you so much for watching, and thank you to Parkoo for sending me these brush pens. Even though I was sent this product to review, all opinions in this video are my own, and hopefully I was able to give you guys enough insight into these pens so that you guys can decide for yourself whether this is something you'd be interested in trying out or not. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and if you did, please be sure to give it a thumbs up and let me know in the comments, what did you think about this illustration, and have you ever used brush pens? If you did, what did you think of them? I'm very curious to see what y'all think because this is pretty much a new medium for me. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell to stay notified for when I upload. I post new videos every week, usually uploading on Sundays. If you want to follow me on social media, all the links to that are in the description box where you can follow me for daily updates. And until next time, stay awesome, stay inspired, always. See ya! Uh-oh. Oh, it's all stuck. The ball is not moving.